So it was clearly like a long and grueling process for you to get that investment banking job. But what can you tell us about what life was like when you were working at your investment banking company?
Yeah, so my internship was honestly pretty amazing. I was an intern. I worked there for 10 weeks. I was working on a live transaction for a live M&A deal for a fitness company. I had a great team. I really enjoyed working with my associate. Associate just a guy that's one a little above me. And overall had a great internship experience because I think as an intern, you're there for 10 weeks, you're working like 89 hours a week, but it's fun, right? It's fun. You're like, I'm a banker. I'm doing this for 89 hours a week. The work doesn't really feel that much yet. And also it's temporary, right? You go back to school afterwards, you talk about your summer experience, you're in the city, you're making good money, you're hanging out with friends on the weekends. Um, but when full time came along, different story, completely different story. I'll tell you that. First of all, I switched to a different bank because I just want to lateral to a larger platform, just get like a more broad over encompassing experience at Wells Fargo. And I want to preface this right now because I don't know if any of my former coworkers are going to watch this, but what I say right now has nothing to do with Wells Fargo. This is the investment banking industry as a whole. Like what I'm about to say right now, like you ask anyone at any investment bank, they'll tell you the exact same thing. I hope they will. So none of this is targeted at my previous firm. So this is just my experience of talking to my other peers at different banks, and they all have said the same thing. But basically, when you're a full-time employee, number one, you're still working like, let's say 60 hours, slow weeks are maybe working 60 hours. And then on the tough weeks, you're working from 90 to 100 hours a week. And the hours are actually okay. I'm gonna be honest with you. The hours are actually okay. Cause let's be honest, we're in our young 20s. Like, if you work 90 hours a week, you're probably that comes down to like you work from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. Monday to Friday, and then maybe you do like another 16 hours, 10 hours on a weekend. That's not too bad. Cause I'm sleeping at 1 a.m. every single day, no matter what. It's like I'm not losing sleep right now in investment banking. I never had a problem with not sleeping in investment banking, except for a few days in which, maybe you get off at 4 a.m. or you have to pull all-nighters for certain pitches or deals. But except for that, sleep wasn't ever really a problem in investment banking. What was actually the biggest issue of just working a job was just the amount of, I guess, grueling and menial tasks that you had to do as an investment banking analyst, which were necessary to get done for the sake of showing to the client. But in reality, no one's looking at it. And I think just the part of just going back and forth, working long hours and doing, these pitch decks, building out these very beautiful, pretty slides that the client's not even going to look at. Eventually, it starts getting to your head that just like, well, why am I even doing this if no one's ever going to look at it? And what I mean by that is that, like, let's say you go talk to a client, right? You have to show up with a pitch deck. But when your MD speaking to clients, they're not even looking at the pitch deck a lot of times. They're just chatting. They're chatting about life, chatting about industry. Maybe they flip to like 5 slides out of a 30-page pitch deck. But what happened to our 25, right? They're not looking at it, but it took you time to build it. And this is what I mean by the work felt very pointless, but it was necessary. Because even if they built the pitch deck, the client won't even talk to you. It's just like, oh, you don't appreciate us as a client. But the fact of the matter is that you have to build it out, but no one's ever looking at it. So a lot of times the work felt very pointless. A lot of things felt like it wasn't, necessary need to get done, but it had to get done for sake of getting done. And that part really, I think, is the biggest part that drives people to burn out. It isn't the hours. It's the fact that a lot of the work just seems very BS in investment banking. And I think the other part that I really want to touch base on is, and I talked to a lot of people that, want to get into investment banking because I was personally like this as well. But just the fact that in investment banking, everyone thinks we're doing some sort of crazy financial model analysis. We're doing these deep dive analyses in these companies, industries. We're getting these valuations, and boom, we're going to sell Uber for $50 billion, right? It's not like that. It's not like that. Investment banking is a job. It's a job. You have a manager. You're following procedures. You're doing things in a very procedural way, just like any other job you do. Yes. Do you build financial models? Yeah, you do. But there's a template. You plug numbers into a template. So a lot of times when people talk about financial modeling, investment banking, I like to think of it more just like consolidating information and plugging these into a template that works. So the job is actually not as technical as everyone makes it out to be. Do you need to know financial concept? 100%, 100% you do. But you're not building these models day in, day out like you are. A lot of time is spent, researching, reading research, consulting information, sending out emails, and just managing expectations for your managers about what needs to get done, what doesn't need to get done. And there's a very funny saying about like aligning logos in investment banking, right? Like, yeah, I got this fancy degree with like a very high GPA just to align logos on Sunday night. That's true. You do that. So it's, but I mean, that's not everything to it, but I think that does kind of speak to like, it does have some elements of truth in it when people say that. It's like, yeah, and you end up just aligning logos a lot of times on the job.
Okay, so you talked a lot. You talked a lot about your experiences in investment banking, and I just want to unpack them one by one. So,
Yeah.
the biggest thing that stood out to me was how you said it's a lot of busy work, and for you and for a lot of people, if you're just doing work just to do it and it's not going to be shown whatsoever, like you talked about, it's like what's the point? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really know about. Which I mean, both of us didn't know about before you
Mm-hmm.
explained it, because the perception, as you talked about, it's like financial models, like you're doing crazy things, but then it's really just that. So I want to talk about two things. One, compared to your internship to your actual full-time job, what was different besides, it was like was the work different? Because a lot of college students might be convinced that in an internship it was really good and then it becomes really bad. So what was the biggest difference there? And second, how was the expectations and the pressure in investment banking? How was that environment? Because I know you have to work a lot of hours, but on top of that, each hour has to be maximized because you're meeting deadlines. So could you just
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about those two aspects?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think the biggest part of my internship to my full time, I guess like the first thing is just like it was different bank, so different people, different managers, different sizes of clients we're working with. So at my internship, we're working with mostly mid-sized companies, anywhere from like I'll say 100 million to a billion in revenue on a yearly basis. But not at Wells, we were working on mostly bigger clients. So we're talking about like mostly big public companies, like think about your Broadcoms and such of that sort. So it was different sizes of clients we're working with. But I'll say the biggest difference was just the fact that like the internship was very short-lived, and I talked about this. It was short-lived, so it didn't feel like it was too much to handle. While when you're full-time, you're like, okay, this is my life for the next unforeseeable future. I'm going to be doing this day in, day out, and your responsibilities also increase as well. Because as an intern, they kind of just give you as much as people blow up the internships and what they're doing. Interns aren't doing much. Let me be honest, interns aren't doing much. They give you like the side tasks to do because they're not going to trust you with the financial models when you actually do build one, right? They're not going to trust you with the important things. But as a full time, you're the guy. You're the guy that's being entrusted with the model. You're the guy being entrusted with the quality of the pitch deck. So as an intern, you kind of be put on training wheels, so it's a lot less pressure on you. But as a full time, we're going to talk about pressure, right? There's a lot more pressure on you to make sure that everything's correct. In investment banking, like you said, it's a very intense lifestyle, work style that you're constantly expected to perform at your highest capabilities, which, I think is a great training program. Let's be honest. Like you're constantly being told that everything you do has to be done to perfection. So that's great training, but it definitely adds a lot of stress into your life. And this is something that I kind of realized after I left the industry, that eventually it really takes a mental toll on you. Because I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you're working on pitch deck on Monday and it has to be get out by Friday of this week because we got to send it out to the client. So Monday, Tuesday, you're kind of drafting out the pitch deck, and then Wednesday and Thursday, that's when the grind session really begins. And you can be working on this pitch deck till like 2 a.m. in the morning or something like that, of that sort. And everything needs to be perfect. You can't miss a single color code. You can't miss a single format. You miss an underline, you get chewed out for that. And it depends on the managing director. Like some are more, I guess, blunt than others, but in general, my manager was pretty good. Again, it's like I never got yelled at, to be honest. I know some other friends of mine where he literally got chewed out by their managers and yelled at over the phone. I personally never had that, but there was still an atmosphere of perfection, that all the numbers had to be correct, all the formatting had to be correct, and everything had to be right by the time I got to the MD, or else you look kind of dumb. And I think this is really silly. The more I think about it now, it's just like, there's always going to be mistakes. There's always mistakes. And in investment banking, I think the funniest part was that a lot of times you just miss a very simple thing. You miss a decimal point on a number, and then you get called out for that. And it's such a silly thing to stress out over, but you end up stressing out about it because you realize how simple it was and how just very minor it was. But because it's so minor and you got called on it, you're like, oh God, like I can't believe I missed that decimal point. So you end up stressing over something very small about that. And I think this just create like an environment, a culture, just very high stress, fast paced, because you're expected to do things at fast paces, but also it has to be perfect. So that things combined together, those things never go together, right? You can't do things fast and expect to be perfect. Let's be honest. Like you can do things fast, expect to be efficient, but perfection takes time. And it was just this constant environment of do things fast, but do it well. Do things fast, but do it well. Eventually you get good at it, but it's never perfect. So you always find mistakes. You always find mistakes here and there. And even though that's fine, eventually you just start understanding that, like, no, that's just how it works. There's always going to be mistakes. That's why you have your associate, you have people above you that kind of helps you review the pitch deck together. But it was a pretty stressful environment in which it was always very fast paced, and you're always expected to do things at a very like intense like deadline.